Friends, I want to discuss very briefly, and this talk will be much briefer than some of my other book talks, or rather most of them. Um, I want to discuss very briefly a book by Umberto Eco, How to Travel with a Salmon and Other Essays. This book is a sheer delight. It's a collection of musings, essays. Umberto Eco, as many of you will recognize, uh, has been a major figure in the Italian intellectual and literary circles for decades. He passed on some years ago, I believe. But um, he became most well known in his lifetime, actually, for a couple of how should we put it, mysteries, very sophisticated, scholarly mysteries set actually in medieval times. The Name of the Rose, published in 1983. Um, but he's also had other books such as Foucault's Pendulum 1989, and a book called Tribals in Hyperreality 1986, for which also he was quite well known. Uh, he had as well a legendary, absolutely legendary library. There's a short video on YouTube, which is only about 90 seconds or so, I believe, where the camera starts with him walking through the library, and unlike my library here, which is kind of a rectangular room, his meandered around over a large space. So he had the luxury of having his collection of 50, 60,000 books spread out over a very large space. And of course, he had maps and drawings and prints and all other kinds of material as well. Uh, in any case, this book originates with a column that he, of course, wrote in Italian, which is his native uh, language, native tongue. Um, these are written for a newspaper, and these pieces, this collection, I should say, is actually what Umberto Eco calls Diario Minimo, that is minimal diaries, which was actually the name of the magazine column. And here he said he started pursuing the pathways of parody. Uh, so you can think of these essays as uh, experiments in parody, in some cases, masterpieces of parody and satire. Um, but like much parody and satire, uh, it's of course layered on a certain understanding of the world, uh, and in particular the absurdities of the modern world. Right? That's what he's trying to convey in some sense. Um, but there are very different traditions to which you can link this book. For example, the famous essays of Montaigne, probably the most famous collection of essays, at least in the Western world, going back to about 500 years. And what did Montaigne write on? He wrote essays on, on things like books, on animals, on the nature of reading and the pleasures of reading, on cannibalism, on the various virtues. And that's what essays do. They take something that interests them, and then they spin a parable or a narrative or a story or a moral um, around that particular subject. And this collection is very funny, by the way. Some of the essays are exceedingly funny, and it has something, I haven't counted them, but I think it has something like about 35 or 40 essays. Let me just quickly read out the titles of a few, and then just we'll look briefly at some of them. So, How to Eat Ice Cream, page 107. How to Spend Time, page 122. How to Buy Gadgets, 126, right? And, a very innocent, naive reader might pick up this book and think that, well, this is a how-to manual, right? How to spend time. There are people in the modern world who will write entire books and they'll sell hundreds of thousands of copies. I mean, it's an absolute puzzle um, to me how books like these actually sell. Why on anyone on earth would want to buy a book which sort of is 200 pages long and gives you a kind of a didactic managerial account of how to spend your time. Make sure that you are doing, what's the phrase that is used? You use it every day and just slips my mind, where you're doing two or three tasks simultaneously, right? Uh, you're saving time. And sometimes we all do that. So, perhaps I want to call a friend or maybe make a call where, which is more obligatory, perhaps. And I think to myself, well, I really don't want to be sitting at my desk and just doing this call for 5 or 10 minutes. Let me go on the treadmill and do it, you know? There are people who will tell you that there are ways in which you can maximize your use of time. Well, this essay on how to spend time is not about such things. It's a parody, actually, of people who believe in saving time in this way. How to watch out for widows, 205. Uh, how to recognize a porn movie, page 222, right? How to take intelligent vacations, page 31, and so on, right? So it gives you a little bit of a sense of uh, the kind of essays that he has written. The opening essay, How to Travel with a Salmon, uh, I think that's one of the things that prompted me to eventually buy the book, a second-hand copy some months ago, because I had read the opening essay, oh, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago. And it was so funny that I have a photocopied version of this essay pasted on my office door at UCLA, because when students come to see me, and if I'm already seeing somebody and they have to wait outside uh, my office, well, they have something to read on the office door. So my office door is plastered with cartoons, some from the New Yorker, some from other sources, short stories, some flyers for books, and so on. So um, I had this essay uh, uh, on my office door. And the essay really is about, it's a very funny essay where he talks about how he um, uh, uh, checked into a hotel with a salmon, okay, a frozen salmon. So let me just read out the first two paragraphs, and then I'll just tell you the rest of the story in a minute. According to the newspapers, there are two main problems besetting the modern world: the invasion of the computer. He's writing this in 1994, uh, and the alarming expansion of the third world. The newspapers are right, and I know it. My recent journey was brief, one day in Stockholm and three in London. In Stockholm, taking advantage of a free hour, I bought a smoked salmon, an enormous one, dirt cheap. It was carefully packaged in plastic, but I was told that if I was traveling, I would be well advised to keep it refrigerated. Ha! Just try. I So in London, he checks into a deluxe hotel. You know how these hotels have a uh, uh, a little mini bar, So, well, when he goes to his room, he has a very amusing account, by the way. So let me actually backtrack. Let me backtrack it because, he said the alarming expansion of the third world, right? Happily in London, my publisher made me a reservation in a deluxe hotel, a room equipped with minibar. But on arriving at the hotel, I had the impression I was entering a foreign legation in Peking during the Boxer Rebellion. Right? For those of you who are not aware of it, the Boxer Rebellion took place 1900, and this is a rebellion in which the Chinese attempted to resist the foreigners, the Europeans. The Europeans and there were Americans and Russians and British and French and Italians. They were all involved in this, 9 or 10 countries. Together, they inflicted a defeat on the Chinese. So it's considered a very humiliating moment in Chinese history. But this is why he says that I had the impression I was entering a foreign legation in Peking during the Boxer Rebellion. Whole families camping out in the lobby, travelers wrapped in blankets, sleeping amid their luggage. I questioned the staff, all of them Indians except for a few Malayans, and I was told that just the previous day in this grand hotel, a computerized system had been installed, and before all the kings could be eliminated, had broken down for 2 hours. There was no way of telling which rooms were occupied and which were free. I would have to wait. Well, anyhow, so now here goes the story of the minibar. He finally is checked into the room. He opens the minibar because he wants to put the salmon in the fridge, and he finds that, well, this fridge actually, this minibar is family size one. There are 50 bottles of liquor in it, So he takes all of these bottles of liquor out. There's no room for this huge salmon. And he puts the salmon in, and he empties the contents of that are all emptied and put into these drawers in a chest of drawers, right? So the next day, he goes out in the morning, wanders around the city, comes back to his hotel room, and opens the mini bar, and lo and behold, what does he see? He sees that now, once again, there are these bottles of liqueur, whiskey, wine, white wine, beer, right? Pale ale, Guinness, Dutch beer, German beer, all of that. And the salmon is sitting on top of the chest of drawers. And he looks inside the chest of drawers, and all the bottles are there too. So, the person who cleaned the room and must have thought, well, Mr. Eco has drunk up all this liquor and taken the bottle somewhere, and he removes the salmon, had removed the salmon and put it on the chest of drawers. And then when Mr. Eco checks out, he gets this massive bill because he has apparently consumed 100 bottles of liquor and all of that. It's really a very funny story. And here he says, last paragraph, okay, because he wants to file a lawsuit against this hotel, which is billed him this enormous amount, and no amount of explanation that he can offer to the hotel seems to be understood by the hotel staff. He asked for a lawyer, and they brought me an avocado. Difficulties in communication. Now my publisher is furious and thinks I'm a chronic freeloader. The salmon is inedible because it's been sitting out too long. My children insist I cut down on my drinking. And this is what I meant when I said it's really very funny. All right. So here we go. Let me look at this chapter called How to Eat in Flight. And it's astonishing that this essay is more than 35 years old, and everything he says there is still entirely accurate. I'm sure everyone who's watching this video or listening in has traveled by air. And you probably travel frequently by air, and you've taken long flights where you get dinner. And you know how with dinner they give you a serviette, a little napkin. It's so tiny, and nowadays they give you a wooden fork and knife and spoon. Don't try to actually pick up any food, much less, let's say, peas, okay, which with that fork, or try to spear a pea with that fork because it won't work. It's a fork just in name. Almost impossible to really spear anything with it and eat properly with it. But Umberto Eco, you see, displays the power of observation. So you could say that these essays are not only exercises in parody, they are that, of course, but behind the parody, this observation, right? You have to have an eye for observation. And here I think the reader who's interested can compare Umberto Eco with V.S. Naipaul, who also had the power of observation, enormously gifted. But there's such a gulf between these two writers, right? Because V.S. Naipaul is uh, churlish is a mild word, right? He's vituperative. He always strikes the reader as a very bitter man, right? An extremely bitter man, very angry, always critical, condescending. Umberto Eco, everything is taken with, a shrug of the shoulder, taken in good, good, taken with a good sense of humor. Um, and what I'm saying is that behind the parody is this demonstrable power of observation and reflection about what he's seeing. So here he says, uh, how to eat in flight. A simple journey by air a few years ago, round trip to Amsterdam, cost me in the end two Brooks Brothers neckties, two Burberry shirts, two pairs of Bardelli slacks, a tweed jacket bought in Bond Street, and a Crisia waistcoat. I have no idea what that is. Uh, all international flights observe the commendable ritual of serving a meal. But as everyone knows, the seats are narrow, the tray likewise, and the ride is sometimes bumpy. Furthermore, the napkins offered by airlines are skimpy, and if you stick one inside your collar, it leaves your abdomen vulnerable. Whereas if you unfold one in your lap, your chest is exposed. Common sense would suggest that the food served should be compact, not the kind that makes spots. It is unnecessary to resort to vitamin tablets. There are such compact foods as breaded veal cutlet, grilled meat, cheese, French fries, and roast chicken. Spot making foods include spaghetti with abundant American style tomato sauce, right? Here's the Italian taking a little stab at the American, who's making Italian food. Eggplant parmesan, pizza straight from the oven, and piping hot consomme in little bowls without handles, right? So he says that's what common sense would tell you. You don't serve foods like these. And how often I've thought to myself, I've, been served spaghetti, and red tomato sauce, and much as he says, often this sauce will splatter, all over you if you're not careful, and the napkin is very small, right? So then he says, he gives an instance of what a typical in-flight menu comprises of. Peas are notoriously elusive, especially if deferring to the insistence of Miss Manners, the consumer is determined to eat the peas with his fork rather than the more practical spoon. Don't tell me that the Chinese are worse off. I can assure you it is easier to grip a pea with chopsticks than to piece it with a fork. It is also pointless to rebut that the fork is used to collect the peas, not to pierce them, because forks are designed for the sole purpose of dropping the peas they pretend to collect. Right? You know, it's quite funny the way he sort of will spend up half a paragraph on the struggle with peas. But I think we've all experienced, something like that, right? Furthermore, peas in flight are duly served only when there is turbulence and the captain turns on the fasten seat belts sign. As a result of this complex ergonomic calculation, the peas have only two alternatives. Either they roll down your shirt front or they fall on your fly. And once again, I have to testify of having had this very experience. All right. So I skip a paragraph here. True, you still have the perfume towelette, but this cannot be distinguished from the little envelopes of salt, pepper, and sugar. And so after you put the sugar in the salad, the towelette has already ended up in the coffee, right? Which is served boiling hot, and a heat-conducting cup filled to the brim so that it may readily slip from your seared fingers and blend with the gravy that is now congealed around your waist. In business class, the hostess pours the coffee directly into your lap, hastily apologizing in Esperanto. And this is where the parody um, comes out in, in full form. All right. So, um, uh, um, let me just give you a sample of a couple of other things very briefly, and I'll conclude with that because once again the reader would have received an adequate sense of this book and why it's worth the reader's time. There's a short chapter which I cannot resist, and it's called "How to Use the Taxi Driver." The minute you take your seat in a taxi, the problem of appropriate interaction with the driver arises. Um, um, the very young among you here who have never taken a taxi, because you've only taken a Uber or a Lyft or a Ola, if you're in India. Um, uh, the considerations may well be the same, but they're certainly true of a taxi. And some of the things that he says will not apply uh, these days, particularly uh, given that people use apps to call a Lyft or a Ola or a Uber, and the payment has already been made. So you're not handing out cash. And in China, of course, it's almost impossible to actually hand over cash to anyone now because everything is completely cashless, right? But I think we have to read the essay as an essay written at a certain time where the spirit of the essay is still fundamentally true. This gist of it is just as funny and just as evocative of a taxi ride that one takes today as it was back then. But some of the details may not hold true in that sense. So uh, when he says the minute you take your seat in a taxi, the problem of appropriate interaction with the driver arises. I know this question arises with the Uber driver too. Do you sit in the back with your laptop or with your phone talking to someone, or should you really have a conversation with the Uber driver? What should one do? This is a question that comes up quite frequently. All right. And so he says, uh, uh, the taxi driver is someone who spends all days driving in city traffic, an activity that provokes either heart attack or delirium in constant conflict with other human drivers. Constantly, consequently, excuse me, he is nervous and hates every anthropomorphic creature. This attitude leads members of the radical chic to say that all taxi drivers are fascists. Not true. The taxi driver has no interest in ideological problems. He hates trade union demonstrations not for their political orientation, but rather because they block traffic, right? Etc., etc. He is a misogynist, but only as regards women who move about. If they stay home and cook pasta, he can tolerate them. Italian taxi drivers can be divided into three categories. Those who express these opinions throughout the course of the ride. Those who are silent and communicate their misanthropy through their driving. And those who work off their tensions in pure narration, describing what happened to them with this or that fare. Absolutely true. I think that this holds true of this categorization of taxi drivers almost everywhere. Though those who, if you give them the slightest encouragement, will just keep on talking. There are those who don't say a word, right? A word. Um, uh, as you said, they communicate their misanthropy through their driving, and the consideration here is simply one where he's suggesting to you that, look, be prepared when you enter a taxi. These are the possible outcomes. Okay, and uh, among the ones who will talk, there are those who will express, political opinions, but then there are those who, as he says, will actually talk about, the ride that they gave to so and so and their experience with this and that passenger, etc., etc. Right? And so he has a little discussion about that. And now I'll just get to the last 2, 3 paragraphs. German drivers are courteous and correct. Uh, they don't speak, they just press the accelerator, right? Uh, when you get out white as a sheet, you realize why they come to Italy for relaxation and drive in front of you doing 60 kilometers per hour in the fast lane. And of course, to understand this, you have to know that in Germany, on the Autobahn, there's no speed limit. So that's why, you're sitting there in a taxi on the Autobahn, and this guy's roaring at 20 kilometers. Excuse me, at 200 kilometers or 150 kilometers an hour, and you come out at the end of it white as a sheet. You're glad you've survived. And the idea of a vacation is, when you go to Italy and you drive 60 kilometers per hour in the fast lane, right? Okay. If you set a Frankfurt driver in his Porsche to compete with a Rio driver in his battered Volkswagen, the Rio driver would arrive first, partly because he doesn't stop at traffic lights. If he did, he would set another battered Volkswagen pull up beside him, full with boys just waiting to reach out and snatch his passenger's wristwatch. Yeah. And you think to yourself, oh, he's engaging in stereotypes once again, you know, but no. I mean, this is precisely that. It's a parody, but it's based on some observation that, well, these are the hazards of stopping at a traffic light. You're the passenger is sitting in the rear seat, the windows roll down, the arm is halfway across the window sill, a motorcycle pulls up, and the boys snatch the wristwatch. Yeah, I mean it's happened, right? And last paragraph, just one sentence. In any part of the world, there is one sure way of recognizing a taxi driver. He is that person who never has any change, right? I think we all recognize that, don't we? Well, so they're lovely essays. How not to talk about soccer. He says he loves soccer but hates soccer fans. Please don't misunderstand me. My feelings toward fans are exactly those that xenophobes of the Lombard League feel towards immigrants from the third world. I'm not a racist, so long as they stay home, right? Quotation marks. That's what these xenophobes say. By home, here I mean both the places where they like to gather during the week and the stadiums where I'm not interested in what happens. And for me, it's a plus if the Liverpool fans arrive, because then I can amuse myself reading the news reports. If we must have circenses, some blood at least should be spilled. The minute the Liverpool fans are there, right? Well, you know what's going to happen, right? They're going to be drunk. They're going to come out, after having had 6, 8, 10 beers each, and they'll start pissing on the road, singing loudly, shouting, throwing bottles, and getting into fist fights. And then there's a bloodbath, right? Read Bill Buford's book, Among the Thugs, right? Or the Thugs, which is on football fans. And I mentioned that book because one of the things that Umberto Eco talks about is the intense rivalry. He just hints at it very briefly. He doesn't talk about it at length. I mean, that's the subject of Buford's entire book, right? That these football fans from different clubs, competing clubs, are so very much like each other, and yet they'll go at each other's throats for the jugular. They go for the jugular, right? But they all come from the same cultural milieu. They like the same beer, they come from the same sort of background, and they hate each other. The Liverpool fans can't stand the Arsenal fans and the Manchester City ones. And Arsenal can't stand the Manchester City fans and the Chelsea and the Liverpool fans, right? And they, as I said, go for the jugular. And this is what Freud described as a narcissism of minor differences, that our most intense hatreds is often for those who are very much like us, who are very much close to us. So what we do is we exaggerate the differences, right? That's what he called the narcissism of minor differences, or sometimes the narcissism of small differences. And this is what Umberto Eco is also referring to in the last paragraph of this very funny essay, How Not to Talk About Soccer, where, as he says, if you're with a soccer fan, the soccer fan will insist on talking to you uh, uh, as you're a fan, because he can't understand why anybody wouldn't want to be a fan of soccer. I have used the taxi driver as an example last paragraph, but the situation is the same when the interlocutor belongs to the managerial class. It's like ulcers, they strike rich and poor alike. It is curious, however, that creatures so adamantine in their conviction that all humans are the same are ready to bash in the head of the fan who comes from the neighboring province, right? And that's why I was alluding to Freud and to Bill Buford's book. This ecumenical chauvinism rings roars of admiration from me. It's as if the members of the Lombard League were to say, quote, suffer the Africans to come unto us so we can kick their ass, end quote. This essay is from 1990, right? So there we have it. The soccer fans, the taxi drivers, how to eat in flight. Um, there's a lovely essay. Let me just conclude with that. It's an essay called How to Compile an Inventory. I'm actually tempted to conclude with another essay, which is, on acquiring a private library, but we leave that aside. Uh, how to compile an inventory, where he talks about bureaucracy in Italy. All right. I dare say that if Mr. Umberto Eco were familiar with the bureaucracy in India, he would have a lot more to write about, and there would be a lot more parody that he could engage in. Okay. Uh, but, every country's bureaucracy is idiotic in its own way. And here he talks about the orders that are received from the top about how to provide an inventory. So an order comes down from the top to an office. Please provide an inventory of everything in your office, right? Um, so, for example, he says, I'm the head of a university department, page 119. Some years ago, we were told to make an inventory of the department's physical possessions, a scrupulous list. Our only available employee was supposed to deal with 1,000 other questions, but it was possible to farm out the task to a private organization that asked for 300,000 lira. We had the money, but in funds meant for inventoriable materials. How could we declare that an inventory was inventoriable, right? I had to set up a committee of logicians who suspended their own researches for 3 days. In my statement of the problem, they saw something comparable to the set of normal sets, right? This is a problem in math, right? Uh, then they decided that the act of compiling an inventory, as it is an act, is not an object and therefore cannot be inventoried. But they further decided that its output is the catalog of the inventory, and as this is an object, it can be inventoried. We asked the private firm to bill us not for the act, but for its result, a result that we then inventoried. For several days, I distracted serious scholars from their specific tasks, but I avoided going to jail. Some months ago, the janitors came and told me that we were without toilet paper. I told them to buy some. The secretary told me I currently had funds only for inventoriable materials and pointed out that while toilet paper can be inventoried, the natural tendency of such paper is to vanish for reasons I prefer not to go into. And once it has vanished, it vanishes also from the inventory. So this is, of course, the parody of what it means to have a bureaucracy, what it means to have a kind of a set of rules, cast in stone, stupid rules, right? The ways in which government offices seek to keep people busy, among other things. Anyhow, this book is a very good laugh. Uh, some essays are funnier than others, but it's uh, very beautifully, charmingly translated into English. Um, the translator is someone who has translated lots of European literature, particularly Italian literature, William Weaver. And of course, I don't know what the original Italian is like, but it reads beautifully in English. And as I said, it's a book that one can spend, let's say, 3 or 4 lovely hours with on a nice afternoon.